Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great today. Thanks so much for coming and joining me in this lesson. We are about to read the next chapter in the Velveteen Rabbit, but before we do that, let's look at some questions from the last chapter, which was chapter 3. Our first question is, what does the word queer mean in the third paragraph? So queer is an old word and may not be used the same way in modern days as it was used in the past. Now remember, this story is nearly 100 years old. So we can look at the text and see that the word is used to describe the way the other rabbits are moving. The other rabbits are moving in a way that is different from the way the Velveteen Rabbit moves. So our answer would be the word queer means to be different or strange. They're moving in a different way, a strange way. All right, number 2. Excuse me. Which words best help the reader understand the meaning of the word clockwork? So the word clockwork is used when the Velveteen Rabbit is watching the other rabbits move. And because of that, we can think about that and think, well, clockwork must have something to do with the way the other rabbits are moving. Our answer is going to be that the words that help me best understand the meaning of the word clockwork are people who jump generally have something to wind them up, because that's what the rabbit was referring to, is how they were moving around and that they jumped. Number 3, why didn't the Velveteen Rabbit want the other rabbits to find out he had no hind legs? Now remember that at the start of the story, the other toys in the nursery made fun of the Velveteen Rabbit for not being fancy. And now here's the Velveteen Rabbit, and he's seen other rabbits that seem very fancy compared to him and very modern, and they must be a whole new kind of rabbit, is what he thought. So we can infer the answer from how the rabbit felt earlier in the story. Our answer is the Velveteen Rabbit is embarrassed and thinks they will make fun of him and make him feel inferior the way the other toys made him feel earlier in the story. And number 4, why does the Velveteen Rabbit nearly begin to cry? In chapter 2, the rabbit just became real. He knows this is very special, but the other rabbits are saying he isn't real. He becomes very defensive about being real, just like the boy became defensive when Nana called the rabbit a toy. So our answer is, we can infer that the rabbit nearly cries because he is extremely upset that the other rabbits don't think he is real. He believes he is special, but the other rabbits are trying to say that he isn't special. And this hurts his feelings. And that's why he's upset, and he's almost ready to cry. All right, before we read chapter 4, let's look at the vocabulary words. There are a few in this one. The first word is stirred, which means that to move around, just moved. Weary, which is tiring or draining. A shawl is a large scarf or a blanket. So I'm wearing a scarf today, but this would be a big one that you would put like around your back. So it's a very, very large shawl. Disinfected means cleaned of all the germs. You know, using something like Lysol or bleach nowadays is what we would use to disinfect. Scarlet fever is an illness that causes a reddish or scarlet rash on the skin. And this was a very scary disease. It was an epidemic when this book was written. So it's something we can relate to today because we have other illnesses that we worry about. And then flushed would be red in the face. So this scarlet fever makes him get red in the face, and scarlet is another word for red. And that is why it's called scarlet fever. All right. let's go ahead and start reading before we look at the chapter questions. All right, here we go. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby. But the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. All right, I've got to stop right here. This makes me so happy. The little Velveteen Rabbit has gotten over the other real rabbits telling him that he wasn't real and being embarrassed about not having hind legs, and he's really realized what matters most. And to him, that is the love of the little boy. And then one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and a light burned all night, and through it all, the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned. And while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the little boy out onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in his bed must be burnt. Okay, well, this is worrisome because, this little rabbit has become alive, and now they're wanting to burn him. And that must be very terrifying for the rabbit. Let's see what the rabbit says. Hurrah, thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside. For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in, and the tiny crabs, and the sand castles. So the rabbit is just like, yay, we get to go to the sea tomorrow. Somehow he's not catching on to what's meant to happen to him. Just then, Nana caught sight of him. How about this old bunny? She asked. That, said the doctor. Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once. What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more. Whew, and that is the end of chapter 4. So, the little bunny has just heard that he's got to be burned. let's look at some questions that we need to think about. It's a very short chapter, so there are only a couple of questions. What behavior best shows the reader how much the rabbit loved the boy? And the second question, which says number 1 on here, is why didn't the rabbit realize he would be burned with the rest of the toys? All right, be ready to answer those questions whenever we come back and read chapter 5 in our next lesson. And thanks so much again for joining me today. I hope you have a really great rest of your day, and I hope to talk to you soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you and your family are feeling well and everybody is healthy and happy today. We are about to read chapter 5 of the Velveteen Rabbit. And before we do that, we need to look at some things from chapter 4. Now, chapter 4 is where we found out that the boy has something called scarlet fever, which was an epidemic back in the time that this book was written. We can definitely relate this to what we have all been through with the coronavirus. So this is something we can all relate to, having to stay put and not get out and play with our friends and that sort of thing. So it really is something we can all relate to. The first question from chapter 4 is, what behavior best shows the reader how much the rabbit loved the little boy? We read in this chapter that the rabbit thought it was very dull to just lay in bed with the boy and do nothing all day. But the rabbit did just that. The answer is that the rabbit was very bored, but he stayed with the boy anyway. This behavior shows that he loved the boy so much he would sacrifice his own happiness and his own entertainment to stay with the boy when the boy needed him. That's very loving. Next question. Why didn't the rabbit realize he would be burned with the rest of the toys? Think back to the beginning of the story. The rabbit knew he was a toy, but since that time, he had become real. Could this have had something to do with him not understanding what was going on? Your answer is, the rabbit didn't even think of himself as a toy anymore. When they said the toys needed to be burned, it never even crossed his mind. They were talking about him, and that would mean that he needed to be burned. Poor rabbit. All right, chapter 5, vocabulary. The first word we need to know is anxious. Anxious means nervous, tense, or scary. The next word is fowl house, which is a pen or a cage where chickens or other birds are kept. In America, we would call it a chicken coop. Plush is a silky material that looks like fur. Threadbare means old and tattered. Tropical jungle is a very thick, dense kind of jungle found in hot, wet places, like the rainforest is a good example of that. Bygone means in the past or long gone. Slender is thin and delicate. Emeralds are stones with a bright green color. And a blossom is a flower. Now, before we look at chapter 5 questions, we will read chapter 5 and we will come back to those. Here we go. All right, chapter 5 is called Anxious Times. And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night, the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it. For tomorrow, he was going to the seaside. And that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. So I'm so happy that the boy is feeling better, but I am pretty bummed for the rabbit. He must be very sad. Let's see how the rabbit's doing. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and to lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. So the poor rabbit, oh my goodness, he's having a rough time. But he did cry a real tear, so that must mean he's really real, right? Let's keep reading and find out. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground. A mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. Okay, already cool. Magic, that nursery magic was happening again. It had slender green leaves the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of it there stepped a fairy. All right, guys, that's the end of chapter 5. We will have to talk about these questions, and then we'll come back and read chapter 6 after this. Number 1, I want you to use your context clues. I want you to go back and read that paragraph where the rabbit is taken back by the fowl house. I want you to figure out what the meaning of the word rubbish is. What is rubbish? Who's put in that bag with a lot of rubbish? Use all the clues around there to figure out what they're talking about. Number 2, how does the rabbit feel when he thinks of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? All right, thanks so much for joining me and watching this video. Think about these couple of questions. It was another short chapter, so not many questions to ask about this time. And we will come back to chapter 6 and finish up the story on the next video. All right, it was good seeing you guys. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.